morning, everyone. My name's Andrew Peters. I'm a lecturer here in Indigenous Studies and Tourism at Swinburne University. It's my great pleasure to be your MC tonight. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land that we're on tonight. I have great pleasure in being a descendant of the Wurundjeri people and the Yorta Yorta people of this great nation of Australia. It's also my great pleasure to work for a university that values the connection to past and present, and particularly to our Indigenous history. And I'm honoured to be able to acknowledge my ancestors and the ancestors of all of us here in conducting this event tonight on traditional Wurundjeri land. I often remind people about that connection when I say we're sitting in a magnificent brand new building. But if you think about the foundations of this building, the things that keep the building steady, they're rooted in traditional land of the Wurundjeri people. So whilst we might be sitting on what we think are artificial fixtures, seats, etc., we're actually touching part of that Wurundjeri history. And as I say, I have great pleasure in reminding people of that when we go forward and have events at Swinburne University, that we are continuing on a tradition that was happening on this very land for thousands and thousands of years. So Wurundjeri Balwa Minjika Yimin Gundibik, which in my elders' language means the Wurundjeri people welcome you to this land today for our event tonight, and I acknowledge our elders past and present. So welcome Vice-Chancellor, members of the Senior Executive, Professor Helen Christensen, Ian Dicker, AM, and the Dicker members of the Dicker family, distinguished guests, friends and family, and friends of Swinburne. Welcome to this year's Barbara Dicker Oration. I know most people were impressed, or in fact everybody was impressed with the presentations we saw from 5 of the researchers at the showcase prior to the event tonight. If you didn't get a chance to see any of the presentations, there are some flyers available at the registration desk on the way out. And it showcases, as I say, some of the magnificent work being done by our Brain and Psychological Sciences Research Centre. So please, if you didn't catch the presentations or you missed some of those presentations, please feel free to grab a flyer on the way out. This vital research in the areas of dementia, depression and sleep disorders wouldn't be possible without the support of the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation, established through the generosity of Ian Dicker and the Dicker family in honour of his late wife, Barbara Dicker. It is now my great privilege to welcome and introduce Ian Dicker AM to say a few words.
I add my welcome to everybody and look forward to an exciting night. It's already been exciting, and I add that we heard 5 researchers present, but there are 30 projects on the run, so we've just got a taste of what is being done at this university. But I feel really wonderful to be back in Hawthorn for all sorts of reasons. But Barbara was born in Hawthorn, raised in Hawthorn. Her 2 sets of grandparents lived in Barton Road in Hawthorn. She spent most of her youth there, and today coming in from Heidelberg we came past her old school at MLC, and of course her father used to take her regularly down to the Glenferrie Oval to see the Hawks play, so this is really the heart of Barbara Dicker. One of the researchers mentioned his study was on happy faces and sad faces, and I can tell you Barbara was always with a happy face. But the work that Swinburne is doing as an outstanding international university, we, the Dicker family, are just thrilled to be associated with what is going on. The way that has unfolded in the last 3 years is just outstanding, and I joke that my children thought that I was giving away their inheritance when we decided we would do this, but in reality the family now sees it as an absolute commitment for the future not just my children, but our grandchildren. And that's a wonderful feeling that's evolved in the last 3 years. And that's due to the great work of the university, their thoroughness, their excellence, their approach. And we as a family are thrilled to see researchers getting an opportunity to do work which they mightn't otherwise be able to do, but more important, the work that they are doing can lead to the well-being of other people in the future. So Barbara would still have her happy face on. Enjoy the night.
Thank you very much, Ian. It's simply wonderful to have a room full of people that realise the incredible value of connections, and it's just wonderful to feel the spirit of your wife with us tonight. So thank you for sharing that with us. I now invite Professor Linda Christensen, Vice-Chancellor of Swinburne University of Technology, to introduce the 2014 Barbara Dicker Oration guest speaker, Professor Helen Christensen.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and may I also begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where we're meeting tonight, the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I would like to say a very special welcome to Ian Dicker and his family. Our guest, Professor Helen Christensen, wonderful to have you here. The City of Boroondara Mayor, Coral Ross, City of Boroondara CEO, Philip Storr, alumni, colleagues, friends of Swinburne. It's just a delight to have you here, and you might wonder if you've come to a family reunion. We talk about this Swinburne being a family, and it is a university that I always describe as having a good heart and good bones. And there's a long-standing commitment to this university that has been here since 1908, 25 years young as a university, but a long history in this community with many points of connection. So tonight is another part in our journey, in our history, in our milestone, as we commit together to make advances in the area of psychological and brain research. You might also acknowledge that we are all, there's a few key people here who are Hawthorn Hawks fans, and not that I want to say too much about that, but it's wonderful that Ian was the past president of the Hawthorn Hawks. So I think we have Peter Hudson here in the audience tonight. I serve on the board, and there's many good players, but all I have to do is get Professor Christensen to barrack for our team, and we're all in there. We have the same last name, but she spells it the correct way, and there's no relationship, but we believe that probably way back we're probably cousins. Professor Christensen is director of the Black Dog Institute and a professor of mental health at the University of New South Wales, a National Health and Medical Research Council John Cade Research Fellow, a member of the Academy of Social Sciences Australia, the past president of the Australasian Society for Psychiatric Research, and the immediate past president of the International Society for Research in Internet Interventions. She is also the chief investigator of the NHMRC Clinical Research Centre for Excellence in Suicide Prevention. Professor Christensen is the author of more than 350 referee journal articles, 7 consumer books, and 3 open access websites. She is an international leader in the use of technology to deliver evidence-based psychological therapies to communities and individuals who suffer from anxiety, depression, and who are at risk of suicide. The impact of her work has been recognized through national and international awards, positions in international and national societies, and citation counts that position her in the top 1% of researchers internationally. Over the past decade, Professor Christensen's research has involved the development, testing, implementation, and dissemination of e-health applications aimed at reducing and preventing anxiety, depression, and suicide risk. Tonight, Professor Christensen will examine the scientific evidence for the benefits of web programs and mobile applications in reducing suicide risk. She will also discuss the use of social media to detect suicide risk and explore its potential to influence population change. It's indeed a great privilege to have her deliver the Barbara Dicker Oration tonight. But before I hand over to Professor Christensen, I would like to tell you a little bit about the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation, which was established by Ian Dicker and his family to honour the memory of his late wife, Barbara. It is through the generous support of the Dicker family that Swinburne has been able to establish this multidisciplinary mental health institute. The Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation supports applied research in brain and psychological sciences with a view to helping diagnose, treat, and prevent sleep disorders, anxiety and depression, and dementia. The ultimate goal is to find a cure, treatment, or prevention for these. The collaboration between Swinburne and the Dicker family enables further research into these vital health areas. Mental health research is an important priority worthy of support, and we believe we are making a significant contribution to the community in the mental health sector. We're proud of our world-class brain and psychological sciences research centre here at Swinburne and are immensely honoured to have the Barbara Dicker Brain Science Research Foundation part of our broader research efforts. The Barbara Dicker Oration tonight honours the memory of Barbara Dicker and the philanthropy of the Dicker family, whose generosity will help many others through mental health research. Most importantly, this work will help improve the lives of many affected every day by mental health disorders. So please join me in welcoming our guest speaker, Professor Helen Christensen, to deliver the 2014 Barbara Dicker Oration.
Well, thank you very much, Linda. I feel very overwhelmed, actually, to have such a fantastic audience here. I have to admit, our family didn't support the Hawks. We used to support Collingwood. My grandmother used to live in Hawthorn, so I used to come down to the footy matches as well. I'd also like to pay my respects to the Aboriginal Indigenous owners of the land and pay respect to them, past and present, and acknowledge the contribution that they continue to make to Australian culture. So, my talk today is about harnessing the internet for suicide prevention. There's little doubt that information communication technology is changing the way we do everything these days, including deliver healthcare and receive it. And this rapid uptake of technology is something that can disconcert us all. And people feel very concerned about the potential dangers of the web in suicide promotion. And I think this is pretty well demonstrated in this lovely cartoon here by Judy Horacek. This is a picture here, and the cartoon says, "Impressed as she was about the World Wide Web, Annie wondered about the worldwide spider." And I think our parents and others are very concerned about the internet. But my aim today in this talk is not to talk about the dangers of information communication technology, but to consider how and in what circumstances technology might benefit those at risk of suicide. So my thesis is that the internet provides the opportunity to reach people who would not otherwise be reached, and through its wide reach offer interventions that may be effective in lowering suicide itself, but also in people's thoughts about wanting to die, and about reducing stigma and increasing help seeking. So the structure of my lecture is in three parts. First of all, I'm going to describe how I got into this field. Secondly, I'm going to look at whether web interventions are effective and whether they can reduce suicide. And third, I'm going to talk about a new area of research, which is about how we can use social media to improve the mental health of our communities. But before I start, I'd like very much to also thank the Ian Dicker family and to say thank you very much for providing research money to set up this sort of highly vital research, because it is the century of the brain. We do need to understand the way in which and how we can prevent diseases like dementia, mental illness. The mind and the brain is the new frontier, and I think your contributions are so marvellous in this way. And also to thank Swinburne University. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great honour to be here. So let's start with how did I get into this area? And I want to start by describing what it was like in 1995. My colleague and I, Kathy Griffiths, we were writing a report for the Australian government on what should we do about youth depression. And we went through the full literature to find out what it is that you need to prevent or to cure early depression in young people. And we found that the only effective therapy at the time was something called cognitive behaviour therapy, which is essentially a talking therapy to teach people how to think differently than they do about events. Unlike now, there was no literature to show that antidepressant medication was useful for young people or indeed safe. And providing CBT to young people was a challenge because there were no supported programs back then. In those times, if you wanted to see a psychologist, it was all in the private area pretty much. There was no better access to psychological therapies. And there were long lines anyway, unacceptably long lines for people waiting for therapy. So we thought, why not build a website that offered cognitive behaviour therapy and offer it directly to the public at no cost? Cognitive behaviour therapy can be manualised. It was a pretty long time ago, and I just want to remind you what it was like then when you tried to get on the internet. I'll stop that. But back then, broadband wasn't even around. There was no wireless. But we did launch the first CBT website for depression in 2001. And it's since been included in SAMHSA's National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs, which is quite a feat to say that it's evidence-based by the United States government. And it's been used by 850,000 people around the world. So the innovation of our website was really fourfold. First of all, we collected data on the mental health of people when they were going through the website. Secondly, we used population-based norms, so we could say whether people were severely affected or not. We built in the capacity to do online randomized controlled trials, which means that you could set up the software to run randomized controlled trials for a fraction of the price of a normal trial. And thirdly, we also included a translation interface. I always make a joke about it's actually translated into Norwegian, which I always say one of the world's great languages. But I'm, of course, very embarrassed now because there are heritage from Norwegians here right at the Vice-Chancellor's genealogy. So I can't say one of the world's great languages, but of course it is. But it's also been translated into Chinese, which is quite an achievement given the number of people who are likely to be unable to access services in China using CBT. Anyway, when we first started, we focused on young adolescents who'd register on the web and undertake a series of work over 3 modules or over 5 sessions. And just to illustrate how it works, you sort of log on and then you put through a number of exercises which try to teach you how to think in different ways about particular situations. This is module 2, which is about changing the way you think. And the graphics and so on were all developed by some young University of Canberra graphic web designers from pre-2000 who did a fantastic job. And basically it's teaching people how to modify the way they think, and highly effective intervention. It was personalised as well, which was an achievement, I think, in some ways, looking back. And what we did was to undertake a randomised controlled trial, which was published in 2004. I noticed my colleague Andrew McKinnon in the front row here, who was also involved in this trial. And what we did was randomise people to either get a control intervention or an intervention with a web-based program or to some psychoeducation. And the results were, we collected information from people directly from the electoral roll, and we randomised them, and these were the findings, which basically show for the gym program, this red line. So after 6 weeks there was a significant reduction compared to the control group, but the effect persisted for 12 months, which was quite a good outcome. So the potential for this type of intervention is probably best shown by a recent trial that was conducted by a colleague of ours, John Powell. What they did was put the website link onto the National Health Service website and invited people to undertake a trial to see if this link and its attachment to one of these web programs, Moodgym in fact, would lead to a significant increase in well-being and a reduction in depression and anxiety. So it was a 12-week study. 3,000 people enrolled in the trial, and around about 70% of those completed final follow-up at 3 months. And what he found was that there was a significant increase in well-being and a significant decrease in depression and anxiety simply by people from the public going and logging on to a program and undertaking it themselves on the web. So simply putting a website up results in significant usage and improvement in health at the population level. So however, this doesn't, I should say here, all the colours, the countries in white are the only countries that haven't accessed that program and benefited from its effect. So you have parts of North Korea and Africa. However, this doesn't explain how I got into suicide prevention. We know that suicide is the most common cause of death in both Australia and other countries such as the United States. For individuals aged 15 to 44, death is more common by suicide than motor vehicle accidents or skin cancer, and it's the 10th most common cause of death overall for Australian men. Suicide is also the same 10th cause of death in the US, and it's been estimated to cost $34 billion in lost life and productivity. Now, the rate for young Indigenous men are 5 times the rate of suicide for non-Indigenous men, a similar finding in Canada with Indigenous communities there. Now, 60% of people who attempt suicide have had no previous contact with a health professional, despite the strong involvement of anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder in suicide behaviour. So these statistics and the questions they raise are more than enough to generate momentum and research into suicide prevention. However, my interest was more personal. The impact of loss by suicide is tragic. It's soberising and traumatic. It's emotionally turbulent. And my daughter's best friend lost her mother to suicide when she was 15 years of age. And about 5 years ago, I was going through what's generally called a rough patch myself and thought, actually, I truly believed not only would I be better off dead, but that my family would be better off if I wasn't there to burden them. Luckily for me, these thoughts passed, but days later I looked back, questioning how it was that I could believe with utter certainty such a thought. And this, as well as the research literature, taught me that suicide motives are mostly about relieving the people we love of the burden we believe we have become, and not about making a statement or hurting people, as many people might think. So I became very interested in suicide prevention, and our Centre for Research Excellence in Suicide Prevention, funded by the National Health and Medical Research Council, commenced in 2013. And I'm going to describe some of the results that we found from that research, which is essentially looking at the internet as a way of tapping in and getting hold of people at risk who are not in contact with health services. So web applications, as described before, deliver therapeutic interventions either through a mobile phone or a web computer or a tablet. And we need to make a critical distinction here between web applications that focus on trying to change depression and web applications that aim to try and change suicide ideation. Suicide ideation being the belief that you think you'd be better off dead. So I've tried to make a distinction between those just to show you the evidence. First of all, for depression. So these are websites that are designed to reduce depression. There's been 2 trials with adolescents, which I'll just quickly summarise. The first, in 2009, found that both depression and suicide ideation decreased, but this study did not have a control group, so it could have just been the passage of time. The second study is by a colleague called Sally Merry from the University of Auckland. She's developed a fantasy game called Sparks, which if you ever get a chance to look at, is fabulous. It's this sort of thing where you have to be like a superhero and go around and get rid of warpy thoughts through playing a game. I mean, it's very engaging and really worth having a look. And what she found was that using a measure of suicide ideation, that there was no difference between her CBT program using this fantasy game and care as usual. Both the trials I just mentioned for adolescents show suicide reductions. However, neither of them had a control group where somebody gets nothing, so we can't tell what the effect might be. So we can't rule out the possibility that suicide ideation would have dissipated simply with the passage of time rather than due to a change in the risk factor itself. So now turning to work with adults, this work was done by Gavin Andrews from the University of New South Wales. Briefly, he looked at all the data from online programs that he had. I think it's about 420 people. And this is before the treatment. 60% have better off dead days. So leaving aside these green ones, which don't have any, these are the people in his depression interventions that feel that life isn't worth living. And these are the results after the intervention with the website, showing that a greater proportion of people are moving back down the continuum, if you like, away from suicide. These findings are very encouraging, but again, there's no control group, meaning that we can't attribute the findings to the intervention. We need strong trial information, trials where our interventions are compared to a placebo group. And there are 2 such studies. The first one was done by Moritz in 2012, and what he found with his website was that there was a change in depression, but not suicide ideation. And we undertook a similar study, which is called the ECHO trial, in Lifeline centres. What we did was recruit people who called Lifeline into one of 4 conditions. And I'll just show you, it's a comprehensive style. And here are the results really for the 4 conditions, which I'll just show you, which showed differences between the effect of the internet website and the other interventions. So here we have people who just got Lifeline services. So if they were distressed, they called Lifeline. And this is over a 12-month period. This was a second group where people got Lifeline services, but they also got somebody proactively ringing them every week to see if they were okay. This is a CBT website with no interaction with Lifeline or anything else. And this is the combined effect of the website plus the call, a Lifeline caller calling. So what you can see there at 12 months is that a website without anyone else being involved is effective in reducing levels of depression. So we're talking about depression here. And what we would say is that it's the evidence-based intervention of cognitive behaviour therapy online, that's self-help, automated, that's making the difference. And that's clear because of the... I hope it's not making you sick. But what effect does it have on actual suicide ideation? And this is what we found. For all of those 4 groups, it didn't really matter whether the person got the website, not the website, or had Lifeline services or not. And our conclusion from this was that suicide ideation and depression are not tethered, and that the effects of a website on depression do not necessarily correspond over to the effects on suicide ideation, and that in fact time is your friend in suicide. So if you can delay a person taking the step by whatever means, by time or by intervention, then you're likely to get a significant reduction in suicide ideation. So to summarise that for the suicide, the depression websites, what we know is depression reduces depression, suicide ideation can drop with a passage of time, depression and suicide are not tethered, but that these findings do not rule out the possibility that there are specific forms of intervention that operate directly on suicide thoughts. So if we just have a quick look now at what are the results for suicide behaviour. The first trial was work that was done by Brekkie van Spijker when she came to Australia from the Netherlands. Actually, what happened when she came was she fell in love with another trial manager, and she's since stayed in Australia, and they're having a baby. But from the point of view of this lecture, what we found was that her study found that an intervention that specifically targeted the suicide ideation component using psychological therapy specifically reduced suicide ideation. So we can do better than depression websites, basically. And these were the findings that she found. So this was the group that had a specific suicide ideation site, and this was the effect if the people didn't receive the suicide ideation prevention site. And we've gone on and are now doing a research project looking at an Australian version of the Dutch study. You can see that there's sort of trying to get an attractive looking website to discuss these issues and putting in different sorts of psychological interventions to see if we can change suicide ideation. And so far we've got 150 people in the study now, but these were the results from the first 30 participants, where we pulled the data to check that we weren't doing any harm by having people either have the website or not have the website. And at the moment it looks like both groups are doing about the same. So we certainly haven't replicated the findings, but this is very early on, and it seems to indicate that it's not a harmful thing to do, which was of course one of our concerns when we started. But the next study is a more recent one, which we have just commenced and finished the first randomized controlled trial. It's called iBobbly, and it's been developed in conjunction with young men and women, Indigenous communities in the Kimberley, and with a group called Alive and Kicking Goals. And this is the app that we've developed. It actually sits on a tablet. And just play this video. Suicide is the biggest killer of young people in Australia. It exceeds that of motor vehicle accidents and skin cancer. But even worse are the rates for our Indigenous young people.
Our solution to this problem is an app, and it came about as a result of a conversation between a group in Broome called Alive and Kicking Goals and Helen Christensen.
Imagine you're the driver of a bus that's going to get you where you want to go in life. On this bus, there are passengers. These passengers are a bit like your thoughts.
We know that there's a high penetration of mobile phone usage amongst Indigenous communities, so we thought, why not combine a type of therapy through the technology which young people use, usually iPhones or tablets, so that we can provide access to this sort of automated therapy and break down problems of not being able to get an intervention that we think works.
If you or someone you know is thinking of taking their own life, click the Help button now.
The impact of the app, we hope, is twofold. Firstly, we're aiming to help people to reduce their suicidal thinking and therefore to reduce suicidal behaviour. The second impact is because it is available all the time and because it's anonymous, there's no shame involved in seeking help, is that we hope to increase help seeking through the app.
Your thoughts are like these rude passengers. You can know that your thoughts are there, but you don't have to believe them. You are the boss of you.
So just gives some idea of how the app was developed. Obviously all the voiceovers are young people living up there. We work with Indigenous communities. So it actually was one of the most exciting projects to be involved in, and I think it's the way app development is going. So it's co-production. It's not we as psychologists saying this is what a person should get out of doing these web interventions. So it's been a revolution, I think, in the way in which we do the work, and we've had a lot of buy-in from a lot of people. So I'll just quickly have a look here I haven't got data, but we have finished 52 people through the trial now, and it's been taken up very much by community, and in fact it bypasses health workers, which is often an advantage when there's been so much intergenerational mistrust and distress. So here's some of the people who helped design the look and feel of it. This is when it was launched in Broome. And this is one of my favourite shots. This is the arm of a guy filling in the app and doing the intervention, and this is a dingo, and they're in a ute. So, I mean, it's absolutely out there in the community doing this sort of work, and it seems, as I said before, to be well supported. So, to summarise the suicide intervention using apps, we'd say they're acceptable and they appear to be effective, but trials need to be completed and replicated. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about now very quickly is new work that we've been doing in social media. And what we're trying to do here is the science of social media, because we think it's so powerful in being able to change so much about how people view mental illness. So, social media is pervasive. The number of internet users in 2012 was more than a third of the world's population. The number of text messages received in one day exceeds the number of people in the world, 7.1 billion. There's 1 billion people on Facebook. If it were a country, it'd be the third largest country in the world. Twitter, 340 million tweets a day. And Lady Gaga, Justin Bieber and Katy Perry have more Twitter followers than the entire populations of Germany, Turkey, South Africa, Canada, Argentina, Egypt and Australia. So imagine what Lady Gaga could do if she's sending out messages. Social media has huge potential to be used for good. So business and marketing have known this for a long time. Social media has the potential to be used to aid suicide prevention, however, even in ways we don't understand yet. And this is because it engages trusted social networks and because it can be leveraged hugely. So it could help with help seeking, it can help with stigma reduction, it can help us understand how contagion happens around suicides, it can provide support and networking. But we have to just in this section think about how it might be used for help seeking. So social media provides the platform for exactly the sort of communication which may induce help seeking, trusted connections between people we know. Social media is an ideal medium to experimentally test models of how to promote help seeking, and social media itself then becomes a platform for promoting help seeking and positive attitudes globally. However, we really need to test this big idea, and this is what we're doing over the next 5 years of our research. What messages will lead to attitude and behavioural change? What network connections will lead to the greatest influence? What methodologies can we be used? And look, it's really fascinating because we know this idea has legs. We know it has legs because of research that's been done in other areas. This is fascinating, I think, and really the way things are going. So this is a network analysis that shows obesity runs in families and through social friendship groups. So if I'm overweight, then my family is likely to be overweight. My friends are likely to be overweight. Think about it in this way of taking a diet, a new diet like the 5-2 diet. Is anyone doing the 5-2 diet? Good on you. Okay, so how you get to do the 5-2 diet is because somebody else you know is doing the 5-2 diet, and then all of a sudden all your friends are doing the 5-2 diet, and then it's skipping along to friends of friends who are doing the 5-2 diet. So we know that these sorts of things move through these social networks. Obesity does, disease, addiction. If we could change things like destigmatise by using these sorts of connections. We also know it can change behaviour, and this is one of the most fascinating studies where people were given Facebook information in the US. So half of them were giving Facebook information with nothing in particular, and the other half were given reflections of their friends back in their Facebook saying, "I voted." These researchers then went and looked at whether these people actually did vote. And the influence of those people just saying back to your friends, "I voted," influenced the rate at which people voted. How powerful is that? We're talking about social media. It's powerful because your friends are voting, you vote. So we've got to use this, and I think this is where we're getting excited about what we can potentially do. So I'll just show you a couple of projects we're doing. The first one is trying to investigate the meaning of suicide tweets. So we see people tweeting, "I'm depressed, I want to kill myself, I could have died." Some of these might be responses to the scorecard at the end of the Hawks game. You know, I could have killed myself because they lost. But how do we actually know what these tweets mean? How can we interpret these tweets? So this project is actually trying to see if we can teach machines to intervene or to acknowledge or to identify tweets that are serious. So in this study, which we did with the CSIRO, we got hold of all the tweets, publicly available tweets, and a number of coders tried to put them into 3 categories. Concerning tweets, that was the default. Very concerning tweets and non-concerning tweets. And the findings from this study are just coming out showing that after coding these tweets, 2,000 of these tweets, and then putting through machine learning algorithms the machines were able to identify what could be a concerning or non-concerning tweet. So even though that's just a first step, it shows that we can actually automate when a tweet might be more concerning than another tweet. And I think that has great potential, because at the moment there are people who respond to tweets because they think they're concerning. But the evidence so far, I think, is we don't know which tweets are really concerning and which are not. One person's judgment's not good enough. If we can develop machine learning that allows us to say which tweets correlate with experts' views about tweets, then I think we'd have different practice about how we intervene in social media when these sorts of tweets are tweeted. The second project is something called We Feel, which we started by trying to map the sentiment of the world, like how happy, how sad are people. And we used Amazon Web Services and CSIRO, and we captured all the tweets that were being tweeted, put them through to analyse the words in the tweets, and then tried to look at the world's tweets to see if we could see whether there was mental health, whether mental health was being reflected in those tweets. Now, you'd be pleased to know the most strongest emotion through Twitter is joy, which is so nice to hear. But what we did, this is Bridie O'Day who did some of this work. What we did was to map it up here in this sort of tweetosphere. So the different colours are the different emotions, and we could look at how the whole world was responding in terms of tweets, in terms of emotions. And, you know, we got this working about 3 days before the budget, the Australian budget. And we've since done an analysis, the results are coming out soon, showing the Australian public was very angry about the budget in May. And what you saw, I haven't got it here, was this fatness reflects the number of tweets of different emotions. What you found was that there were these peaks of anger prior to the reading of the budget, and then as the budget was being read more, there were sad tweets largely being tweeted. So we've also just recently done the same thing for the death of Robin Williams, to see if you could actually see tweet responses, and we've mapped it for around the world. So it's really showing at least there is some validity to using this as a real-time surveillance tool of the mental health of the world. And by the way, you can go to this website called wefeel.csiro.au, and you can play around with this Twitter tool because it's publicly available, and you can download the tweets and look at your own areas that you think might be interesting. The third project is one that we're just experimenting on right now at the Institute, and what we're doing is we've have some software that allows our mobile phones to connect with other mobile phones and record that connection. So connectedness is really important for mental health. We want to know offline and online, can we connect and understand how people connect? And we've put this software on the mobile phone, and what it's doing is picking up who we interact with, who's also in this experiment at the moment. And we're doing maps of who's the most connected. So it's a technology that's picking up offline social connections, and it also picks up online social connections, like who we email, what we do. So we're just experimenting with that idea of seeing if we can study how this works, then maybe we can influence it. And the final one is one that I've been doing with Sveta Venkatesh, who was at Curtin University. This is looking at blogs on websites, and we've we recruited a number of people to come along to join our study, and they're filling in mental health surveys, and we're also looking at their blogs to see if we can automate mental health, if we can validate blog capture by computer scientists as a means of identifying mental health status. So, this has been quite an exciting ride really for us in the last 6 months, and we are yet to find out how useful social media will be, and that's our program of work for the next year. So to conclude, the internet allows faster trials in areas previously not studied. Trials on the internet are of high quality. They're as of high quality as face-to-face trials, and the dissemination potential is enormous once a program's been found to be effective. The use of web and mobile applications holds promise, and social media is unexplored and is certainly worth investigating. And I'd like to acknowledge all the people who've been involved in the research over the last 20 years or so, including, as I say, Andrew McKinnon, who's here from the University of Melbourne, and all the other people who are currently at the Black Dog Institute. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helen. A couple of things that I took out of that was the first encouraging thing that was Helen's moving from a Collingwood supporter to a Hawthorn supporter, which I think is a great thing. Obviously, Australian men are irresistible because we attract academics from all over the world who never go home. And that I'd like you to think about working on an app to raise the wellness of Richmond supporters during finals time, please. We now have time for some questions. We have a couple of roving microphones, so what we're going to do is obviously rotate. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and what we'll do is then get Professor Christensen to answer those. Perhaps I'll start. I was just interested in one of the data sets that you presented showed that websites and people looking at websites was good, had a very big effect in reducing depression and the suicide ideation.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea why simply looking at a website seems to have such an impact as compared to perhaps calling a helpline?
The programs contain sort of therapeutic approaches to changing people's emotional health. So there are things like cognitive behaviour therapy, acceptance commitment therapy. So they're built on psychological principles that therapists do every day with people at risk of depression or with depression and anxiety. But the thing about the web, it's highly interactive, and also people are able to work through it in a manualised way. So they're teaching themselves what therapists will be trying to show to them by going through the website. So it's also not just reading it, you actually have to experience it and learn from it. So the more we make these websites interactive and appropriate for the target groups, the more effective I think they'll be.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you for that speech. It was very interesting. One of the things you were talking about that I thought maybe you could just talk a little bit more about is where you identified the concerning tweets, and that's where the project seems to have finished. But will you go on to look at whether providing a tweet following that will then have some impact?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. First of all, the project's not finished. What we're trying to do now is to see if we can even do better by looking at the responses that people make to the tweet to help identifying if it's a serious tweet or a not as concerning tweet. So if somebody reacts who knows the person in a very strong way, then it's more likely that that tweet is to be in a concerning tweet. I think with respect to what this means in terms of intervention, I'm very cautious that we collect the information first before we do the intervention, because for something like Twitter, if you're not a friend or a follower of that person, then your response to that person is public, and we're concerned that that would perhaps have negative impact. And so again, a lot of the suicide prevention agencies like Lifeline and so on are not recognise, like we do, that it's not necessarily the best thing to do to publicly intervene on a tweet that we don't even know its true significance. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question is just here.
It concerns stigma and the misuse of data. The proposal for providers to have to retain the metadata for 2 years and then can be used by whomever.
Yeah.
How do you trust a website if you don't know?
Yeah. Okay. So with I mean, the privacy and confidentiality concerns around the websites that we have are very much tuned to asking people if they're prepared to give their data when they come onto our websites, whether they want to participate, like any other participation. It's true that there's an awful lot of collection of data happening, metadata that's happening around the place, and I think we're treading extremely carefully because we don't want to put people offside by using data without their permission. On the other hand, one of the projects we've also just started is with the St James Ethics Centre. So we're trying to work in ethical practice into both the use of the information and the other side. So not wishing to be provocative about this, it's kind of the end to which the data is being used. I think that has to be the judgment of how we use it. So, you know, in those circumstances where the data is not public, then it has to be with the permission of the people and it's for the good of the project. With data that is available, I think that is currently exists, it's a question about whether it's ethical to use it and whether it's ethical not to use it. So I don't know if that's answered your question, but it is concerning the metadata.
Thank you again. Next question up to the left.
Thanks very much. I was wondering about your depression app. We know that with drug therapies that are proven, it can take 10 to 15 years until it moves into the mainstream use. So I was wondering, given that you've got an app that's been proven to be effective, what the uptake is like in the private and public sphere with psychologists and psychiatrists.
Well, it's a really good question. It's a very complicated question to answer. So, for example, in the United States, which has a completely different way of healthcare, it's a race to get your app accredited so that you can offer it like any medical device to the community and charge for it. So it really depends on the health system. In Australia, we have a much more broader view, I think, of how these interventions should be used at a public health level, so they should be free to the user. And that's always been pretty much the way in which they've been offered within Australia. So I personally think that there should be a very strong accreditation process around it, and the industry itself has been trying to develop guidelines, particularly for the public, about what a good app is and what a bad app is. And there's a site at the Australian National University called Beacon, which rates all the sites in terms of the extent to which they're supported by experimental evidence. So I don't know if that is enough to...
And are departments actually using them? Do you know?
I think we have a problem about interfacing offline with online, but certainly at Black Dog at the moment we're working on a project which tries to integrate online programs like the CBT programs into the medical software of doctors' surgeries, medical director and so on, so that it provides an easy mechanism for referrals to be made to these products.
Thank you, Anna. I think we might have time for one more question.
Can I ask about the interesting findings that depression and depression ratings don't change as suicidal ideation changes?
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering about, it doesn't make sense clinically, because depression drives suicidality, and that's what we would generally be taught, and that's what we would have. I'm hearing my own voice, and it's very weird. And I know this is probably Susan Russell trying to do something to me, and I'm in a MRI scanner at the moment. But anyway, I'll just put that thought. Is it the metrics? Is it the way you're looking at it and the questions you're asking, or is it a real thing?
Good question. First of all, I was really surprised by the results myself, but having talked to other people, they're not so surprised. Secondly, it could be the metrics, in the sense that suicide ideation and so on is quite difficult to measure reliably. In that case, we use Bob Goldney's measure, 4-item measure, which has seemed to be pretty good. So I think what you're having is different time courses. So depression might, respond more slowly than suicide ideation. So you've got these different trajectories happening, and so when you measure at a particular time, you'll find differences.
Thank you again. Unfortunately, we're out of time for the questions, but would you all join me again in thanking Professor Helen Christie? And again, once again, thank you, Professor Christensen. In lieu of a gift, or a speaker's gift tonight, the university will be donating to the Black Dog Foundation. So, thank you. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. I'd like to thank everyone, friends, staff, students, for attending. We look forward to seeing you at next year's Barbara Dicker Oration. Once again, thank you very much.
This has been a Swinburne production.